7-year-old Jack lived in a small house with his 2-year-old little sister, Brooke. The house stood in a freezing snow-covered region, surrounded by danger. All around the area, there were countless zombies that constantly tried to break inside, but Jack always stood guard with his toy gun, doing everything he could to protect his sister. Ever since the virus outbreak, their parents had disappeared without a trace, and from that day on, the 2 children had been surviving there alone with their dog. One day, a man named Donnie drove up to the house in a truck and started asking Jack about his parents, but Jack refused to answer him. He also carried a toy gun loaded with poisonous darts, so Donnie wisely decided to leave without causing trouble. The very next day, Donnie returned with his wife, Melanie, and once again asked Jack where his parents were. Jack told them his parents had gone into town to get supplies, but Donnie and Melanie both knew the town was nearly 50 miles away, and they had been watching the house for quite some time. They were certain Jack's parents had never gone to town. They had most likely died because of the virus. Donnie gently told Jack that they didn't want to hurt him. They only needed a place to stay. If they all lived together, then Jack and Brooke would be safer too. Jack clearly didn't want them in his home, but he was too young and powerless to truly stop them. Later, Donnie told Melanie that they needed to hide the truck somewhere. If her father found out where they were, he would never allow them to stay there. It turned out Melanie was the daughter of a militia leader named Brett. After marrying Donnie, she had run away from home with him, but because martial law had been declared, neither of them could leave the frozen region. This was the same area where the zombie virus had first spread. Militia members weren't actual military soldiers and had no legal authority. They were simply civilians trained to fight like soldiers, which was why people called them militia fighters. Donnie looked around the house and told Melanie this place had plenty of food and even electricity. Melanie replied that if nothing went wrong, they could keep living there even after martial law ended. As for the children, their parents were never coming back alive, so all they had to do was take care of them for now, and eventually the house would belong to them. Hearing all of this deeply upset Jack. He didn't want them there, and for the first time, dark thoughts entered his mind. He started thinking about how to get rid of them. Jack didn't want his little sister getting hurt, so he secretly locked Brooke inside a hidden shelter with their dog. That shelter was the reason they had managed to stay alive this long. Meanwhile, Donnie and Melanie were peacefully watching TV when suddenly, a large group of zombies gathered outside the house. Melanie quickly turned off the lights so the creatures wouldn't notice them and would hopefully move on. But then, everything went wrong. A zombie suddenly attacked Melanie and badly injured her. Donnie grabbed a gun and rushed to help her, but before he could react, Jack attacked Donnie too and killed him. Elsewhere in the frozen region, a retired army soldier named Dan had also been trapped there. He had been lying unconscious beneath the snow, but suddenly woke up and dug himself free. Gathering his gear, he headed north and eventually arrived near Jack's house. Brooke laughed when she saw him, which confused Dan for a moment, but it was only a distraction. In the next second, Jack shot him with a poisonous dart. Dan collapsed unconscious on the ground. When he woke up, his gun and knife were gone, and one of his legs had been tied up with wire. Dan calmly freed himself and walked over to Jack. Jack asked, "What's your name? And how did you escape the trap I set for you?" The man replied, "My name is Dan. I'm a specially trained soldier, so I've got experience dealing with traps like yours." Then he asked Jack about his parents. Jack answered, "My parents work for US Homeland Security, but they're not here right now. I don't even know when they're coming back. Now tell me something, are you thinking about becoming our new parent?" Jan coldly replied, "I have no interest in being your father. You don't want me here, and I've got somewhere else to be. So give me back my knife and gun, and I'll leave quietly. If you help us fix the house first, I'll return your weapons, and then you can go." Jan could have easily overpowered Jack and taken his weapons back by force, but he knew one thing for sure. If he left those 2 children alone out here, the zombies would tear them apart. So despite everything, he agreed to help them. Dan took Jack over to the treadmill and said, "My mom used to run on this thing to power the house. I've tried, but I can't keep it charged properly, so I need you to run on it and help get the electricity back on." Just then, a zombie wandered outside the house. Dan grabbed a weight plate and smashed its head, killing it instantly. Jack wasn't happy at all. He looked at Dan and asked, "Why did you kill it? You could have just ignored it." Dan replied, "If even one zombie gets inside this house, none of us are making it out alive. Do you really think these windows can hold them off forever?" Jack answered, "This isn't some normal house. These windows are bulletproof, so you don't need to worry about zombies getting in." Angry and frustrated, he grabbed Brooke and stormed off. Later, Dan tried to rest, but he was hit with another nightmare about his wife and child. He woke up in panic. These dreams haunted him so often that real sleep almost never came. Unable to rest, he got on the treadmill and started walking. As the nearby machine charged up, the lights in the house finally came back on. Meanwhile, Jack went outside to check his traps. There, he found a zombie caught in one of them. He slowly moved closer, but suddenly he heard a gunshot and quickly hid. Melanie's father, Brett, had arrived with his younger daughter, Gabrielle. A dead zombie lay nearby. Brett handed Gabrielle a gun and told her to shoot it, but she was terrified. So Brett took the gun back and moved forward himself. Gabrielle Gabrielle noticed Jack hiding nearby, but she didn't tell Brett. Instead, she quietly left with him. Dan wanted to know what conditions were like outside the frosted region, so he turned on the computer. But Jack's mother had locked it with a password, and Dan couldn't access anything. Then he found a set of car keys and tried to leave using the vehicle outside, but the car was broken down. He later walked over to a nearby door and tried to open it, but Jack quickly stopped him, saying, "That's our private place." Don chose not to argue and walked away. That night, Dan once again dreamed of his wife and child, leaving him restless. Then he suddenly heard noises outside. He looked out and saw Jack heading toward the trees far from the house. Dan quietly followed him. Jack stood near the trapped zombie, writing something down while staring at it. Dan asked, "Is that your mom?" Jack said nothing. Dan picked up a piece of wood and moved in to kill the zombie, but Jack instantly aimed his toy gun at him. Jack didn't want any zombie to be killed. Dan backed off and walked away, but now suspicion was growing inside him. He went to the same door Jack had forbidden him to open and looked inside. It was a small room with bloody claw marks all over the walls. Before Dan could process what it meant, he heard a vehicle outside. A hunter had arrived near the house and was walking around with a gun, searching the area. Brooke was standing by the window, but Dan quickly pulled her away before the hunter could see her. Jack noticed what Dan had done, and for the first time, he truly appreciated him. Dan had protected Brooke. The hunter found nothing and quietly drove away. Brooke hugged Dan to thank him. From then on, Dan ran on the treadmill every day to generate electricity, and because of that, Jack finally returned his weapons. Dan once again tried asking Jack about his parents. Jack had grown tired of the same question and finally snapped, "My parents are dead and they're never coming back." Dan felt terrible hearing that, but he also knew he couldn't just abandon two children in the middle of a zombie-infested wasteland. He told Jack, "I can't stay here forever, and I don't want to leave you two behind either. I made a promise to someone that I'd keep heading north, so once the car is fixed, I'm taking both of you with me." Jack was overjoyed to hear that, but in that same moment, hunters suddenly stormed in and grabbed Brooke. Dan and Jack rushed out with guns in hand, but one of the hunters had a weapon pointed directly at Brooke's head, so neither of them could make a move. When the hunters saw Jack holding only a toy gun, they burst out laughing. Then, out of nowhere, Jack's mother, Mira, opened fire with a sniper rifle and killed all three hunters. But while trying to free Brooke, Dan was shot in the stomach. He collapsed to the ground and lost consciousness. Suddenly, Dan began having terrifying dreams of his wife turning into a zombie. He jolted awake and came out of unconsciousness in a panic. But something was wrong, or maybe right. For some reason, the gunshot wound in his stomach had completely healed. Mira looked at him and said, "You've been infected with the virus. That's why the bullet didn't kill you, and why your wounds healed so fast." Dan couldn't understand it. If he was infected, then why hadn't he turned into a zombie yet? Mira explained, "This virus affects people in two different ways. First, there are the zombies. Their brains have stopped functioning. They need to feed on living people to survive, and they spread the infection through saliva and blood. But you're not a zombie. You're something else, a changer. Somehow you were infected, but you were lucky enough to return to being human again. You can see this infection as both a blessing and a curse. It will heal wounds and fight disease inside your body, but at the same time, it's slowly consuming you from within. One day, you'll turn into a zombie for good." Dan suddenly remembered the past. His wife had turned into a zombie, and it was likely that when she bit him, he became one too. But when he emerged from beneath the snow, he had changed back into a human. Then he looked at Mira and asked, "How do you know all this? There's no way you figured it all out by yourself." Mira answered, "I work for Homeland Division's Office of Domestic Preparedness. We've been studying this virus for a long time. That's how I know." Dan then asked, "How will I know when I'm turning? How much time do I have before I become a zombie again?" Mira shook her head. "There's no exact way to know, but if the dog stays near you, he'll sense it immediately. He was trained for years to recognize zombies, and Jack is infected too, just like you. That's why every night he ties himself up before sleeping." Dan still couldn't fully process everything he had heard, so he stepped outside. Jack came over and tried talking to him, hoping to make him feel better. But before they could say much, Brett arrived with several armed men. Dan quickly took Jack inside, while Mira stepped outside with Brooke to face them. Brett asked about Jack and her husband. Mira's husband was already dead, but she lied and said both of them were inside the house. Brett said, "I'm only looking for my daughter Melanie and that worthless husband of hers. Have you seen them anywhere? Why don't we go inside and talk?" Dan knew that if Brett came inside, everything would be exposed, so he quickly smeared peanut butter on Jack's hand and sent him outside. Jack walked up to Mira and said, "Dad accidentally dropped Brooke's diaper bag downstairs. The whole house smells awful now." Dan then came outside wearing a mask. Brett didn't suspect anything, since people often wore masks to avoid infection, and when he saw the peanut butter on Jack's hand, he assumed it was something filthy from the diaper mess. Disgusted, Brett backed off and left with his men. That if they were gone, Mira told Dan, "You don't need to worry. If Brett went toward town looking for his daughter, it'll take him a long time to come back. Town is 45 miles from here. Homeland doesn't even know we're living in this house, so we're safe. We don't need to go anywhere." Dan didn't agree with her at all. Frustrated, he walked away. He tried to sleep, but but nightmares of his wife and child kept tormenting him, leaving him restless and broken inside. By morning, Dan had made up his mind. He was leaving the frosted region and heading north. He started packing his things. Mira tried to stop him, but Dan said, "If we get out of here and tell the government what's really happening with this virus, we could save a lot of lives. I'm not going to stay here and slowly die." Mira looked at him with pain in her eyes and said, "Jack has a dangerous heart condition. My husband Steven was a scientist, and he infected Jack with the virus while trying to cure him. Yes, Jack is alive today, but this wasn't a cure. It was a curse. Every single day I look at my son like he's some wild animal, one that could kill me and Brooke at any moment." She then led Dan to a zombie nearby and stabbed it in the head, killing it. Mira explained, "If the virus fully takes over the body, zombies can be killed normally, but there may be other changers out there, people like you and Jack. That's why Jack always set traps around the house, to keep them from getting inside." Dan then asked about Steven. Mira said, "After Jack turned into a zombie, we kept him locked in a cell. When Steven went to check on him, Jack bit him. Steven turned into a zombie too, and ran off into the snow. I hoped he'd become a changer, but he didn't. He attacked me instead. I had no choice. I had to kill my own husband." Now Dan finally understood the pain Mira had been carrying all this time. Because of that, he decided to stay a little longer. He began running on the treadmill to generate electricity, helping take care of the children, and supporting the family however he could. Mira was deeply grateful for everything he was doing. But suddenly, Jack was close to turning into a zombie again, and the dog sensed it immediately. Without wasting a second, Mira locked Jack inside the cell so he couldn't hurt anyone. Days passed, but Jack still didn't turn human again. Realizing things were getting worse, Mira began repairing the car so she could take Brooke and escape from there. Brooke was outside playing when she suddenly collapsed and lost consciousness. Dan and Mira rushed over and pulled her out of a trap, but she wasn't waking up. She had suffered a heart attack. Both of Mira's children had holes in their hearts, and Brooke's condition had finally caught up with her. Dan looked at Mira and said, "If Jack bites Brooke, it could save her life." But Mira couldn't bear the thought of turning her 2-year-old daughter into a monster. She refused, and because of that, Brooke didn't survive. Sometime later, Jack finally changed back into a human, and Dan released him from the cell. Then Dan packed his things and prepared to leave. Jack and Mira both begged him to stay. Dan said, "My wife was one of the best people I ever knew. She helped others without expecting anything in return. She even gave up her own safety to save people. She taught me what it means to help others, and now I can't stay here anymore. I have to get out of this place and warn the world about the virus, so lives can be saved." With that, he walked away. Jack was heartbroken. His little sister was gone, and now Dan was leaving too. That night, Brett returned with his men and attacked Mira's house. They captured her. Brett found Mira's Homeland Security badge and was shocked. He had no idea she was a special Homeland Security agent. As he beat her, he kept demanding answers about Melanie and Donnie, but Mira truly knew nothing. Meanwhile, Dan realized Mira and the children were in danger, so he turned around and came back to the house. Jack was hiding from Brett and his men, and he quietly told Dan where all the guards were positioned. Dan began taking them out one by one. At the same time, a massive group of zombies gathered outside the house. Soon, Brett and the remaining men surrounded Dan and pointed their guns at him. Dan didn't fight back. Instead, he shocked everyone by slashing his own throat with a knife. Brett couldn't understand why Dan had killed himself. Everyone was distracted and confused, but Mira understood exactly what he was doing. She grabbed her son and ran. Brett ordered his men to kill them, but then Dan began transforming into a zombie. The monster inside him had fully awakened. He brutally slaughtered Brett and all of his men. As he stood there, he began seeing visions of his wife. She softly told him, "You didn't do anything wrong. You were in so much pain, but now it's over. Now we're happy." Suddenly, Dan woke up again, and he was human once more. He grabbed a gun and rushed into the house, but no one was there. Mira had already left with Jack and Brooke's body. The only one left behind was Gabrielle. She had turned into a zombie and was feeding on a dead body. Dan could have killed her, but he remembered what Jack once said, and he chose not to. Mira had left a letter for him. It said, "Jack is a very brave boy. At only 7 years old, he protected his little sister. But now I understand that our home is no longer safe, and we can't stay there anymore. We tried to warn the world about this virus before, but no one listened to us. Maybe after all this destruction, they finally will. I followed your advice, and now I'm heading north with my children. I hope you come find us." Dan went to the garage and saw the car was gone. That told him Mira had fixed it and successfully escaped with the children. For the first time in a long while, Dan smiled. He picked up his gear and began walking north on foot, determined to find them again. And with that, Uncontained came to an end.